Between Us. This is Between Us, a podcast of Blue Alliance IT employees building relationships through tough conversations in work and life. I'm your host, Alena O'Donnell. Please note, the topics discussed in this episode are about Black and white relations, racism, and systemic racism. For some, this might be triggering. This can be especially true for African Americans who too often are the go-to folks when acts of violence about African American deaths are in the news. For those who are neither African American nor BIPOC, these may be triggering because you've tried to have these conversations, but maybe failed or worse, were rejected. We ask everyone to listen and hold with respect this retelling of two lives and one relationship. This personal conversation shifted a decades-long friendship into a new frontier and made us better together. In this three-part series, the viewer gets an honest look into a sisterhood between two women, one white, one Black, who discovered that they can have real, meaningful conversations, work through racial healing, and make meaningful change. Between Us is what they built in the 2 years since the summer of 2020. Here's my friend, Alexia Zigoris, and me, Between Two Best Friends. We're back with Alexia, and this is Between Two Best Friends. And when we last talked, it was 2001. There was the murder of Timothy Thomas, a Black man. We had another jump in our relationship where we were part of a group of women called Sisters in Common. And that's where your learning took a huge leap because you were forming personal relationships with Black women of different races. And yet you and I still had not really bridged between us the topic of race.
Yeah, so our relationship, continued over the next decade and a half or so, or however many years that is. And our kids grew up, they went off to college, went through a divorce. You were there for me every step of the way. We vacationed together. We had just, like a rich friendship. And the summer of 2020, we all know what happened. George Floyd was murdered, and it was a wake-up call to the nation. And yet again, and you were feeling that in a really significant way, as you should have. And I just didn't want to deal with it at the time. I was like, I wanted to respond to it, but there was a moment where I had a personal thing that was going on in my life, and I wanted to talk to you just about that. And I wanted to not talk about what happened.
We're coming back to your birthday again.
It was my birthday.
You remember
there's a theme
in
around here.
episode 1, we talked about how we met on her birthday, and we loop back 20,
whatever. I don't do the math, Alena.
Okay, to really your birthday again.
It was my birthday, and I had a situation with my family that upset me, and I was like, it's my birthday, and all I really want is like to not talk about all of this stuff. Like I want to shut it all off for one day. And it was, so I said to you, I just want to close the door and ignore this for one day. And so you listened to me, and whatever the whole thing was that I was talking about, which is not really relevant. It is relevant, but it's not. But you were my friend first. And then when we got through that part of the conversation, you turned to me and said, and this is by phone, but I heard you loud and clear because your voice just went into a tone that I'd never heard before. And you said, I just want to tell you, don't ever say that to a person of color ever again, that you just want to turn it off because that is offensive. And I was like, oh, okay. Like, I felt I felt bad. I was already feeling bad because of the situation. And then I felt even worse because I heard it. Like, and that's the first time you'd ever said something like that to me before. And I sat up. I was like, okay, what do I do with that? Like, and I didn't really know how insensitive I was to how you might be feeling all of those years prior. Like, so that took us in a different direction as friends, because all of a sudden now I'm thinking, and that didn't even get uncovered until much later, like really what your experience is in this world versus my experience in this world.
You know, that conversation, I sit in a place where that I will say that I can sit with people in pain and that part of relationship. What I don't do well is follow back up with, and I'm just going to use the term microaggressions, which for everyone listening, I don't like the term microaggressions because they have macro effects on people, and repeated over time, it becomes wearing and it just tears you down. So there had been different incidences along and in our relationship that have occurred that I had not addressed. So in the last episode, we talked about avoidance versus ignorance. And so there were times that I had avoided because I just didn't want to deal with it. Frankly, I didn't want to deal with it. The same, you didn't want to deal with the news that, we're in a pandemic. We can't go out anywhere. The murder of George Floyd, there was an election, it's climate change. Those four things were basically revolving or rotating headlines, just those four things. So, to a human, that is, it's a lot to deal with, just these four things. We need variety. We live in privilege that we can, some of us live in homes that we can go to different areas of our home to escape another room or someone else. And that's, not the same for folks. Right. And so it was the same during the time. I was so affected by it that I even wrote a letter and I sent it to our senior leadership team, including Nick, and it just affected me so profoundly. So when Nick and Katie, said, hey, we do need to not just start a dialogue, but we need to address what's happening. How can we do this? How can we can't run away from diversity, equity, inclusion. And we are not talking about diversity, equity, inclusion. We are specifically talking about racial healing and the concept of this topic, race, and how that affects almost a 30-year relationship, right? And yes, I was hurting, and I had to let everyone know. So I couldn't do that. And even though I, being a former social worker and behavioral science, behavioral health and social services, I'm still human, and I could not figure out how to even manage my own feelings and thoughts at the time. So, yeah.
So we were kind of we were at a bit of an impasse in those months that followed that conversation.
Yeah, what happened? Like what happened to me and you, and where did I go?
Yeah, I didn't know what to do. I didn't know what to say or not say. And I was like, oh my gosh, conversations with some of our friends and family members, like trying to figure out if I had really, broken our relationship off with that comment. And I thought, I just didn't know. And it wasn't until you were able to tell me what you were feeling and really share, like on a much, much deeper level, that I'm going to get emotional, that I realized that all these years I had just been chumming around. We were chumming around. We were friends, and we were friends on such a deep level spiritually too, because that was the foundation of our relationship, was the fact that we were, we prayed together, we broke bread together, we vacationed together. And yet I had missed this major thing that affected almost everything that you do in your life. And I was ashamed and embarrassed and thought, like, I don't know how to repair this. And you know me, and you're the same way. So we both go into action, like, okay, we're going to do something to fix it, And really the main thing that I had to realize was that I needed a heart change. And so anytime I talk to people about any of this, I'm like, well, where's your heart? Like, if your heart is not in it, you can go through all sorts of motions and check boxes and write great press releases or hire people or, put people on boards. But if your heart does not have an understanding of the way that each of us experience this country called the United States of America, we have very different experiences here. If you don't have a heart to see that and feel that, then those are great, activities to do. But what we really need is
and that heart change. I don't know when that came, but I know for me, I had to go away. So I know I dialed down our communication and.
You went away.
Yeah, I did.
She went away.
In the midst of this, I'm your maid of honor, and I was conflicted. And basically, really, what I did was I took several months and I went through a trauma-informed training that was by and for BIPOC, which stands for Black, Indigenous, People of Color, and that's commas in between all of those. And I'd done a lot of trauma-informed training before. Just because of my past jobs, but this was very different. I was the subject matter.
You were the,
and I was forced to really, frankly, just address and face some of these. What I found out were really they were fears, right? And how do I, moving forward, create a plan of communication, of safety plan? How do I co-create a model between those whom I trust when I am experiencing and triggered, especially when it comes to race relations? Having gone through that, one of the things that I knew that I had to do is I had to talk to you very deeply, very meaningfully, and very intentionally. And I really was scared. And that is because those to whom we're closest can have effects that hurt us the deepest, frankly. But I knew I had to be loyal to the friendship that we cultivated over the years. We've broken bread, we've shared tears, and I had to address how I was feeling, why I was feeling, some of the things that I experienced from you over the years that I never addressed. And so that was part of my responsibility in our relationship. And so we had a long conversation in your apartment, and I thank you for giving me the opportunity to have that. And it was raw. I even needed support. I had, one of my longest, deepest, like high school friends, praying over that. I worked on word choice. I worked on how I would, my body language, the tone of voice, like how I would approach this, because the subject was so sensitive. And I'm really not talking about the subject of race. I'm talking about race in the context of me being a human being and your friend, and our relationship and where that was going to go. So I guess what I would say to you is, when we had that conversation, what was going through your head? And what did you observe of me during that really, really hard conversation where I was really confronting you with, the struggles that I had with you and us?
Yeah, well, hindsight, looking back at that, how grateful I am that you did come to me rather than not, because had you not, we would not be sitting here today. And I did get married just recently, and you were my maid of honor, and it was on the other side of this really important, pivotal conversation. At first, when you started talking, I was like, what? How, like when your kid comes to you in college and goes, you did this, this, and this over the years, and I didn't like it. I kind of felt like that. Like I did all of these things over all these years. And it wasn't like you had a laundry list of, in 1997, we did, whatever. I don't think we knew each other in 97. But anyway, like you didn't have
no grudge holding.
You had no grudge holding at all. It was more like, this is what I have experienced in our friendship over the years. And these are things that you may not be aware of that you do that really affect me. And at first, I'm like, okay, I'm doing an inventory in my head. I'm thinking, okay, what did I say then? Or what, and it was a long conversation. We were there for several hours.
Mm-hmm.
And
bless you.
Everything in me wanted to pick up a notebook and start taking notes so that I could like inventory everything you were saying. And then, I'm sure it was, I don't know, God or whatever, but it was like, no, just listen and be present and try not to go to your head. So I'm a head thinker. I'm an Enneagram 7, which means I'm always in my head problem solving. But what I did in that moment, which is probably why Michelle was praying for us. I just outed Michelle. But anyway, was I went to my heart and I was listening with my heart and I was trying to understand how you felt and what I had done or not done. And not done is just as important as done, I'm an executive coach and I have a guy that I'm coaching who says to me, it's the way you don't react to situations as a leader tells more about you than the way you do react. So if you don't react to certain things that need to be addressed, then, that's just as bad as reacting poorly. So I learned some things in that conversation and I was open to it because I love you. And and you love me. And it was like, okay.
And that's right.
How did we get to that?
Stems from love.
It does.
It was a very hard conversation. That had to come from a place of love. And for my part, it didn't come from a place of bitterness. I had to get all of that out. I had to get all of the poison out of me, frankly, through that several month, training and just blood, sweat, and tears going into some things that, I'm continuing to work on this day. And how was my demeanor?
You were humble and not accusatory, and you were there because you cared about our relationship, and that was really, really clear to me that you cared about us, and it was hard for you.
And let's be clear, I did not know what was going to happen afterwards. I didn't know if we were going to remain friends, but what I did know is I felt I did the right thing, and if doing the right thing meant that we were no longer going to be friends, I would have laid that down. And it's strange to say it now, but at the time I would have laid that down and not had any remorse or regret for having said that. So in your mind, so this is one of your closest friends, your heart, your brain is like exploding. You're like, oh my gosh, some of the words you're saying, I don't even know what they mean. And what you asked for a part 2. So I really have to say thank you. And for those that are listening, here's what's really cool about this. The ball was in Alexia's court, frankly. And what I appreciate is that you said, can we come back together? And why was that important that you reached out and wanted to come back together?
Well, the first thing was this was your platform this particular day when we first came together. You shared with me all of these things. And when we got back together, I wanted to say to you, I heard this. And is this what you were saying?
Can you give an example? Because sometimes I know we're trying to be sensitive to our personal conversation or relationship, but is there anything in particular that you can zone in on, that you would like to zone in on and say, oh, Alena, when you said this, I, did whatever?
Oh boy. I'm not sure that I can zone in on any one particular thing. I think it was more that I needed to be able to say to you, I heard you share with me that there have been years and years of us being friends, and I've not inquired, I've not asked questions, I've not asked how you feel about certain things, because like I said, you go back to our previous 2 episodes, we were in, getting things done and bringing people together, and you were a leader there. And I thought you were all good. You know, like there's Alena, she's up here at a high level making stuff happen for other people. But I think I just needed to let it sink in, number one, and number two, to reflect back to you that there have been years of hurt that have taken place between us that that I never knew about, that I was ignorant of, which broke my heart because I thought, gee, here's somebody that you're at the top 3 of people that I love in this world. I mean, maybe, yeah, top 3, I would say. And I was doing that and I didn't know. And it just made me aware that, and there were other things that I've said and done over the years that, you know, I knew exactly when I said something that was wrong and in the room that, you know, you've helped me to see, okay, here, Alexia, you know, this is why that could be offensive to people. Just because I'm, you know, blabbing off or saying things and not really thinking about others. So you brought me to that place where I am more sensitive to, this is not just a black and white thing. This is disabilities and all the whole spectrum of humanity, which you are so sensitive to. And me, I zip along in life and get stuff done. You know what I mean? So you've brought me to a place where I view the world differently. And I think that was what I wanted to reflect back to you. Did I hear you correctly? I'm sorry, that was a really long-winded way of answering that, but did I hear you correctly? And what can I do now to move in a different direction in some things that I do?
And you did. And you move like, so when you said you're a person of action, you definitely are a person of action. And, you know, so in the 2 years, and actually it's that relationship, that hard conversation really took place winter of 2021. And I couldn't be more in awe of you because you really took to heart. And that's something that I don't often see. You know, companies, they'll post on social media or will say things and then, you know, it dies down, the music, you know, fades, and then another cycle comes back. And those are the things that are more triggering. So when I use the term triggering we just said in 2001, there was Timothy Thomas, there was Roger Owensby. We can go down the road, and then you fast forward to, you know, we can fast forward along the way since 2001, and then we go to 2020. And so what have you done? Here's what I have seen you done in your work life, and you're the leader of your organization. So in your work life, you formed a diversity, equity, inclusion committee, and and asked for me to be on there. But you made that one of your top 3 priorities for you and your staff. And then a year later, you reported it back to your board and said, that was one of our, 3 priorities. I'm reporting back on that. This is the percentage of, whatever the metrics you chose. Mm-hmm. You reported back on the metrics that you chose. Even on top of that, you and your staff took personal action, which is, what are we going to do to put a lens of inclusion on? I think that was impressive for me. So you still have this committee of the board, right? You are still building upon that, what your priorities are in the area of representation. And then your staff are having personal action. So whether it's articles, webinar, I don't know what other things. And I see that in our relationship between us, that there's a sensitivity now. You are noticing. And, I would like to close with something that really warmed my heart. You went to New Zealand for your honeymoon, and you came back. And it gets me. And it was a real example that you picked up, and my interpretation is you got it. I mean, I know it'll be a lifetime of learning, but there was something that was so profound for you. Can you share with us?
Well, yeah, New Zealand and Australia, they basically pushed out their indigenous people when the white people arrived and basically obliterated the culture. And one of my friends who lives in Wellington, New Zealand, told me that the government is turning that around and they're bringing the culture to the forefront. So there are people represented in the news, on TV with, facial tattoos that are indigenous tattoos, and programming and dual language signs, and they honor the land. And they, when you go on we went on some kayaking trip, and the blessing over the land was done in Maori, the Maori language. And so I saw it everywhere, and I thought,
and even the stoplights
were like, yeah, the stop signs, and they were so funny. They were really cool. They were like indigenous dance moves. So go was like, and stop was this, which was an indigenous dance. And so they creatively incorporated that and wove that into their culture in a way that I felt was
their culture.
Never seen before, and you talk about going to Hawaii. It's the same way in Hawaii. And I was like, oh my gosh, Alena has to come here. You have to go to this country, because they're humble about it, and they acknowledge it. It is not, I'm certain that there is shame around some of the activities that went around, basically pushing out a culture, but now it's part of the dialogue of everybody, not just, a certain source or here or there. It was just everywhere I went. And I thought it was incredibly powerful. And I thought, well, I don't know if that will ever happen in our country, but we can certainly create space around that. But the thing is, when you said, what was it specifically that you said, it can't be specific to one incident. It has to be kind of like woven into your DNA, that you see and you feel and you hear, and you are part of, illuminating the inequity, the injustice, and bringing equity and justice and voice and belonging around tables and missions and purposes.
And so, as a person of action, as we close out this series, you are someone, you say, look, money is time, time is money, and you're like the Alexander Hamilton, right? What have you noticed in the past 2 years in yourself when it comes to, racial healing? I know for me, it's not the easy button. So what is something that, if you were to think of 2 or 3 things that you'd like to leave the listeners with and your learnings between 2 best friends, what would they be? And specifically as a white woman.
Oh gosh, there's so many. But one thing in particular is there are often times when there is one person of color in a room full of all white people. And I am very conscious of the fact that may be, that's their experience in business or whatever. And so I just try to be conscious of that and approach and hello and be a little bit more, forthcoming or forthright, and just going to introduce myself and to start up a dialogue or just conversation, like, hey, over coffee or whatever it is. So I notice that more. I am also very aware of how I check myself and my own discrimination, my own prejudice that I have in my own self. So, and I do, we all do. So I have to acknowledge that and check that. And then, move on beyond that. I know that I have the ability to bring to light ideas in company that may not have those same ideas. And that to me,
that's really important.
That to me right now is really, really important. So I know I have an audience or a group of people that I can say, hey, let's use different language around that. Or have you thought about this? So I'm excited about that. That's probably where I'm most excited, is that I get to be a voice in a room of all white people and possibly bring around or illuminate some truth that maybe they are not aware of, or maybe never thought of it that way.
Yeah.
Just from my experience.
Right on.
Yeah.
Right on.
So,
well, I am thankful that we had this time between us, between two best friends, because, you know, I'm looking forward to 30 plus more years with you. And thank you so much for being here and between us.
Well, and thank you, Alena, for being a gracious leader in this arena, in this very difficult thing, especially knowing how it impacts you on a day-to-day basis. I mean, and you bring such love and such community, heart and grace around a very difficult subject. So I just want to applaud you for that and for just remaining faithful in our friendship. So
I appreciate it. All right. Love you.
Yeah, love you too. Hugs, hearts.
Okay. This is Between Us, a podcast of Blue Alliance IT employees building relationships through tough conversations in work and life. I'm your host, Alena O'Donnell. I'm over culture and inclusion at Blue Alliance IT. This podcast is about sharing my stories of courageous conversations and to be a launching pad for you to have yours. Through these stories, you'll hear from others who struggle with these types of confrontations, how to persevere, and learn how to be more conscientious in your interactions. We invite real people to have real conversations and take real action. They may be hard, they may be hurtful, but with love and understanding, in the end, they can make us better.
What do you want me to start with? We're still friends? Okay.